Welcome back to day 2 of Andrew Jackson. It's very exciting. We are all excited about it. Look at beautiful Rachel Jackson here. We are going to pick up where we left off. We talked about the tariff that nobody liked, the tax on imported goods. We talked about the fact that people love to nullify everything. If you guys could, I'm sure you'd nullify all the homework I gave you, but you can't. Anyways, we're going to start back with Andrew Jackson. We're talking about his political campaign, his second run for presidency. He is more confident. And essentially, he spent 4 years basically trash talking, and all the people who supported Jackson made John Quincy Adams' presidency horrible. So he has a really good start for the 1828 presidential election. As mentioned yesterday, the day before, Jackson is known as the man of the people. Remember, I actually had you fill out like one of the questions was how did we get Spain? Andrew Jackson started an illegal war against the Seminoles, against the Native American tribes in Florida, saying that they were helping runaway slaves escape, which they were because they both hated white men. Anyways, so he goes into Spain, refuses to leave, and eventually Spain sells the territory to us. So Jackson's kind of been very much a troublemaker, I'm going to say, but he also gets his way a lot. And then he also will be responsible for the Creek War, where he gets a nickname Sharp Knife, which you can imagine is not because he really likes sharp knife. It's probably because he's been using it to hurt people. This is a picture of his wife, Rachel, on the left. He's very, very protective of her. She was married apparently to a guy who wasn't very nice and then kind of just left her and for many years. And then she met Andrew Jackson and they got married, but she wasn't officially divorced because she didn't know where the guy was. So people call her an adulterer. And Jackson, like, she was his world, like, was so in love with her. He would fight anybody that said anything about her. By many of his opponents, he is considered a murderer. I think probably by today's standard, we'd also consider him a murderer because he did participate in numerous duels. And like I had mentioned before, he also used martial law, which would be like um, very strict rules and punishments towards the people that he led in the military. So what's going to happen is shortly before Andrew Jackson is elected president, wins the election, his wife is going to die. And Jackson blames people and the media who trash talked her because he thought she's so sweet. She doesn't deserve this. She, in part, has been dealing with so much stress and anxiety that this has caused her to be weak, and she died before he was able to take official ownership of the White House for a few years. So, what is Jackson's presidency? This is Andrew Jackson riding a pig. Yes, that's right. And you can see on the left it says, "To the victors belong the spoils." This is very much a concept that we can still see in place today, especially in Trump's government. You can see the spoil system getting used. People who supported Trump, who were $1 million donators to his political campaign, Betsy DeVos, the education secretary, she is a good example of the spoil system, where you literally give government jobs not to people who were qualified, but to people who supported you, to people who backed your journey to that presidency. Now, these are not Trump and Jackson are not the only people to use it, but they use it heavily. And so what it does is it takes away the knowledge that's in the government of people who actually know what's going on and how to run things, and just puts in people who support you and kind of like are yes men. So a lot of the government will not run quite as smoothly under Jackson, because he kind of gets rid of some of those people who are lifetime politicians, which could be a good thing. But also, when you get rid of lifetime politicians and experts, you get rid of the expertise. His presidency is also going to be known as the nullification era because he's going to basically veto so many acts, over 12 acts of Congress, and states, on the other hand, are going to nullify any acts that the Congress tries to pass because they don't believe it's constitutional. He's famous for getting rid of the Second Bank of the United States, and he's very famous for the Indian Removal Act. And when I say famous, I actually mean more infamous. And the Specie circular, he decides that all public land, should be sold and purchased using gold and silver, which is a big problem when you have a limited amount of gold and silver. The first thing we're going to look at is this idea of the Second Bank of the United States. Now, we already talked about the first Bank of the United States that was established by by Alexander Hamilton. Remember, he's the one who was like pushing for big government and for a national bank to help pay off our debt and to regulate our currency. Well, many people still see this idea of a national bank as overstepping a government's reach. that banks should only be controlled by states and should small local banks. So Jackson is not a fan of the Second Bank of the United States. The Second Bank of the United States is still one of those where you collect taxes from, you help, you give out loans, you regulate the currency with that's flowing in and out of the United States. And I know you guys can read, but if you look, it says bank was hated. People in the West hate the bank because they're in the West. They don't really have much use for it. They think the bank has too much power, and they're not really receiving a lot of government loans from that bank because they're just out on farms trying to survive. Whereas if you're a New Englander, you might like it because you're receiving money from the banks. They're giving you loans to start more manufacturing. In New York, they hated it because they would collect taxes that then were sent to Philadelphia. Doing New York no good. Jackson hated the bank because he just didn't feel like anybody was holding it accountable. And so he wanted all that power to be delivered to the state banks. So what ends up happening is the people who are controlling, some politicians and some board members who are controlling the national bank, the Second National Bank, think, all right, he's going to have to like renew our charter. So you have to renew a charter. It's just like renewing your lease. So every 4 or 5 years, you renew your charter. Even charter schools have to renew it. Say, hey, this is a job we're doing. This is what we need to do. Please sign. Please sign at the dotted line that we can still continue to run for 4 or 5 years. The bank is cocky enough to believe that they're going to get, that there's no way that Andrew Jackson won't renew their charter. They're like, if he doesn't renew our charter, there's no way he's going to get reelected. So he has to do it. So they were so sure of themselves that they actually applied for an early renewal. Well, they thought Jackson was not going to renew it. They thought Jackson would have to renew it, be forced to renew it. And Jackson looked at him and said, nah, I'm not going to renew it. You don't get a charter. So the National Bank gambled on Jackson needing votes for the election. And what it ended up doing was making Jackson even more popular because he didn't renew it. So people in the West liked him even more. People in New York liked him even more because they got rid of this troublesome bank that they didn't feel was helping them out. It's kind of an American idea. If you don't feel like you directly benefit for something, you want to get rid of it. Nobody else should have it. So federal money is then taken and dispersed into different state banks, thus giving power to the states. One of the other things that Jackson is known for towards the end of his presidency is the Specie circular. Public land must be purchased with gold and silver. When you have a limited source of gold and silver, it makes it very hard for anybody to be able to purchase this. So it drives down the price of land because nobody can buy it. All right? You can't buy it on credit. You can't do anything like that. I have to come up with you with a bag of gold in order to purchase land. And so real estate people and landowners are like seeing the fact that they're not able to sell their goods because the demand for gold and silver is necessary under the Specie circular, but people don't have it. We know that gold and silver is like oil. There is a finite amount, and once that runs out, you don't have any more. So this is obviously 1837. This is about 10 years before the gold rush and silver rushes that will happen throughout the American West. So we're not there yet. So whatever kind of gold and silver we have, that's what we got.